let's just really quickly recover and recap whatever just happened right now. So we talked kind of about NASA, which was kind of cool. So the only way I can tell listeners of why you want to tune into this podcast particularly is because not only did we have Stephen, who is like a rocket himself, but we also had Chris, who is just so full of so much energy. How do you even be a human being like this? So, we're pioneering a new planet, I think, on this podcast. That's what it sounded like. And thoughts.
You think about what was happening when NASA got started in the 60s and how exciting all of that was and what that's led to, what a huge shift in our consciousness that led to, even just to know that we can escape the bonds of our earth. And, it's this huge, expansive thing. Really, creating the new world we're talking about is no less expansive. And in fact, maybe it's even harder because it involves people and changing their behaviors and their beliefs and their thoughts. And I don't know what to say. This whole conversation, I think at one point in the chat, I said, I hope I don't cry, because I was just feeling so many emotions. Like I
was too.
just didn't know what to do with them. Like,
what I loved so much about Chris, though, is that he's super relatable. So here, we were like gearing up for the podcast and we're so like, oh my goodness, Chris is like an incredible human being who's done so many things. Now he's in the White House. And of course, Stephen touched on that too. We all wanted to know, like, how do you get to the White House? What was that call like? I love that he asked that question, but
it's relatable. We all do want to know.
Let us not forget that this conversation really showed us today that aside from all the political craziness going on out there around the world, that there are people like you and I who have made their way into governance, who have gotten a call and who are actually doing the job day in and day. They're putting 14-hour days in while having a family because they are passionate and persistent and won't give up. And that's what I learned from this podcast today, is that, holy man, like, leadership is about fill in the blank, Beth. I mean,
well,
what did you learn about leadership today?
Well, and let me, hold on. I took copious notes today. Let's see.
Always the SAT master over here of vocabulary, copious.
Passion, patience, and persistence, I believe, is what the way Chris put it. And I mean, he's a great example of that when he was describing all of the things that he had to do to get this department going, this new office going, as part of the Department of Energy. I mean, he was doing 25 people's jobs at that point, trying to get this going. And I think civil servants in general don't get the appreciation and the honor that they deserve, because they're not necessarily the people who are out there with their face all over cable news. They're the people who are actually governing the nation and improving it for its people. And actually, I come away with a tremendous amount of hope from that. Just to see all of the positive. We've had a lot of really positive legislation. Chris talked about some of the synergistic legislation that we've had over the last 3 years and what an impact that's making. But somebody has to push it through and make it happen. And that's what Chris and so many of our civil servants do. So I have a lot of...
his whole team. He's got 60 people he's working with, created an entirely new arm just based off of how do we solve this energy situation and to get the United States in the race, right, of like transitioning to energy and really putting, feet to the pavement, which is awesome. I love that. And he said $16 billion, I think. I don't know what it is, but
yeah, I think it was $16 billion. And the fact that it's starting with the government, just like NASA, starting with the government, but now it's kind of percolated down so that there are so many private enterprises, businesses, foundations, local governments that are on this path that it's sort of like unstoppable now. And it doesn't I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. Yeah. It matters, but it's not a deal breaker if there are things that happen at the highest levels of government. It doesn't stop ultimately this push for change. So
yeah,
I don't know. And then you get like Stephen in there. And I feel like there is absolutely nothing on this planet that won't happen if Stephen wants it to happen. I mean, just his energy and passion. And
we discussed, I think that we just, for the first time on our podcast, if the listeners are going to tune in, you might see the most magic moment of this conversation, which was like there was an ask and there was a thing that happened and you won't want to miss it. It was incredible. I mean, that was so cool. I was like on our watch. And then the humility of Stephen being like, it happened on your show, guys. Like it just so that, and I'm like, no, it's totally between you two. It's amazing. So that was incredible.
And what I hope is that when people listen to our podcast, like we talk about this all the time, that they really feel something. And I hope that they do. I hope that they feel hope and possibility and dignity. And what's the word I'm thinking of? Like, I guess, a surety within themselves that they can make a difference, and to feel empowered that they can make a difference. Both Stephen and Chris talked about that you can start with yourself. Start with yourself. What can you do today? What can you do here?
It was the call to action even. It was like, just do one thing, which seems to be the thing that we always talk about and struggle with personally off of this podcast. And to be vulnerable, we do talk a lot about, like, some of these issues are so big and we are so small, and you do have this sort of like, what can I do? I'm entrenched in a system that will not allow me to change it, right? So, but what we're seeing from our podcast is that all of these people are coming on, we're at the table, they're at the table, and there's nothing that we can't do together if we just sit at the table and have a conversation, come up with ideas and solutions, and point people towards those, to act. Yeah. So I'm
it's like we're inviting everybody to come into our living room, and we're going to sit down with these, world changers and get empowered so that we don't have to feel like we're totally powerless and there's nothing we can do.
And they're humans too.
They're
cool.
Totally regular people. They're not superhuman, even though we ask about their superpowers. They're regular people.
We do.
Making a big difference in the world.
And man, I dropped the faith question today. Sorry about that, everybody. But I just thought it was very important. And for some reason, it just came to me like on a Sunday. So
I think you were inspired. And, that's okay, because Chris was very vulnerable, very honest about what drives him.
I just need to know, because like the sun rises and sets and time goes on and you've got a family and there's love in between. I mean, there is something else that makes us all tick. And whether you want to call it faith, religion, I don't know, spirituality, nature, there is something that we don't see that animates us. And I just really think that was an important conversation to have just today. For some reason, that came out of nowhere. So get ready for that, folks, because you'll listen.
Glad you asked. Yep. If we don't ask, we won't know. So
that's right. And so tune into this episode, of course, with Chris Castro and, of course, our guest, Stephen Ritz from the Green Bronx Machine. And you're just going to get, you're going to lift off to a different planet, obviously, from this conversation.
A greener planet.
A greener planet.